So now, Middle School Art Club, you can see that I have finished drawing this design onto my tinfoil. And I'm just going to lift this up and kind of tilt it a little bit so that you can see the design is there. It's easier to see in person, but you can actually see all of your pencil lines. So then the next thing to do is using a black Sharpie, go ahead and outline anything, go over any of those lines that you might want to. I've got a couple different types of black Sharpies. I've got the regular kind like this. And I've also got a couple of thinner tips that are more like this that you might want to use on some of those smaller details if you want to outline like the flowers or something like that. And then the next step, once you outline everything, is to go ahead and start in by coloring anything that you want to actually be black. So on mine, for instance, I would make this part, this part, this part, and probably honestly behind the eyes, and then these little shadows. So basically wherever there is black on my design, I actually like that. So I would want to make sure that I go ahead and color that in before I start in with any colors. And then in terms of the color on the tinfoil, it's completely up to you exactly how you finish these. You can use whatever color Sharpies you want to. You can mix and match the colored Sharpie. I'll show you a couple of different techniques and things that you can do if you want. But the main thing is I want you guys to have fun with these. Outline with the black first, and then just kind of go to town on the color and really enjoy what you are doing. So I'm just going to go ahead and move that one out of the way for now, but keep it close enough so that I can see where the black is, because I'm going to go ahead and outline some of my lines with black. Now, as I have said in the past, it is okay to turn your work as often as you need, because everybody draws a line a certain way best. So for me, I tend to make my curves best if I'm going this direction. So I'm just going to make sure that I turn my page so that as I am working on those curves, I can be going in the direction that I know I am most comfortable with. So again, it's much easier to see your design on the tinfoil in person. So right now you may or may not really be able to see where my pencil lines are until I put them in with the black Sharpie, but that's okay. Right now what I'm going to do is just kind of outline the outer edges of everything with my thicker black Sharpie, and then I might go into some of the smaller detail areas like the flowers with a thinner black Sharpie before I start adding color. So just kind of treating all of the flowers, even though they overlap, kind of as if they are one shape for now. Because instinctively, I don't think I want dark lines in the flowers, or the thick lines, I should say, in the flowers. But I do want some semblance of an outline there. So I think what I'm going to end up doing is just tracing sort of the outside of them with my thicker Sharpie, and then tracing over the interior lines of everything with a thinner Sharpie. So then here I am going to go ahead and trace the bottom of my flowers with my thicker Sharpie as well. Gonna have to turn a little bit so I can see exactly where those flowers go, because the tinfoil does reflect a little bit. Another good thing about keeping my pattern close by is I can look back to it for reference if I'm not quite sure where any one of my lines is, whether that one needs to be thick or thin. So now I think I'm going to actually go ahead and put this line between the teeth in with my thicker Sharpie as well. But then I will outline the teeth and outline all the other things with a thinner Sharpie. So I'm going to go ahead and, while I still have my thicker Sharpie out, just color in the areas that I want to be black. So when you're using color and when you're using the black Sharpie, it's important to go pretty neatly and sort of slowly up and down so that you can control where the Sharpie goes, but you want to move kind of quickly across so that you're filling up that space as smoothly as possible. It's also important to remember that your Sharpie will actually smudge if you wipe it while it is still wet. So you do want to be careful to make sure that you avoid rubbing your hand across or your sleeve or anything like that across an area where the Sharpie is wet. So I'm just going to continue sort of filling in the area that I want to leave black. Mostly because they are just shadow spaces within my sugar skull. Going to turn the page so I can smooth that line out a little bit more. Still being careful not to rub my hand over anything that I've already colored at this point, just in case that Sharpie is still a little bit wet. So once again, slowly up and down, but sort of quickly across that space so that it stays nice and smooth there. So now the next thing I would do would be to color in the spaces behind and around my eyes. But I'm going to outline that carefully first and then color that in. Still being careful to make sure that my arm and sleeve do not necessarily bump into the Sharpie spaces where I don't want them to. Sharpie does dry pretty quickly, but it's always a good idea to just be careful. So now I've got the outer circles on both of those eyes outlined. The harder step is going to be those flowers, which I'm going to kind of outline now. Again, treating both rows of petals as if they are one shape, like I did on the flowers around the outside of the entire sugar skull. Because then my lines inside, I will do with the thinner Sharpie. Right now I'm just focused on making sure that I know where I'm going to be putting the black. So then I'm going to color in that space. I tend to color sort of in where the corners are first, and then work my way out to the outer edges of something where it's smoother, just so that I can focus on making sure that my details are done before I get into the larger pencil or marker marks. Turning the page as needed, and again, still being pretty careful to avoid rubbing my hand across any Sharpie that I've already put down, just in case it is still wet. You can also put a tissue under your hand to try to help with that a little bit. I tend to not put a tissue under my hand because it's like a false sense of security to me. The tissue can still rub the Sharpie, but it will not rub as much as your hand would. Just going to go ahead and color in this other side. Because remember, once I have all of my black in place, then the next thing I'm going to be doing is just to add color. Basically, whichever colors I decide to use within my sugar skull and wherever I decide to put them. You can leave some of the silver showing. You can also decide to color the whole skull and have the only silver showing be on the outside, which I think is probably what I'm going to end up doing. But once again, the exact colors that you use, where you put them, and how much color you use is up to you. You could use lots of warm colors. You could use lots of cool colors. You could use a combination of things. You could use all the earth tones and just do different shades of browns and greens and oranges and sort of make it look like it's all nature-y. Completely up to you. So once again, just going to continue finishing up with my little black spaces here. Double checking my pattern to see if I have left anything out. Now keep in mind, you don't necessarily have to use any black on yours. I just like to use black in some of those shadow area to help create more contrast. So now this one would be ready for me to use the thinner Sharpie to outline any of the details, or just go directly in with color. Personally, I like the outlining look for this type of a project, so I will probably finish outlining with a Sharpie before I add color, but you do not necessarily have to.